Since my time in the Congo, I have made it a personal priority to use my role as a legislator to help connect Canadians to this issue and curtail the presence of conflict minerals in Canada. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I am so proud to be standing today launching debate on the Conflict Minerals Act, Bill C-486. The journey to here began 5 years ago.
5 years ago, I visited the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is a country that has as much beauty as sadness. For over 15 years, the Congolese state forces, rebel groups, and private militia are fighting to control the territory and the abundance of natural resources that have caused so much harm to the country.
Congolese government officials to see what was being done to enable a future of peace and sustainable development. The most striking response was not an answer, but a question. My question turned back at me. What are you doing? Was the question posed to me. And it was a fair question, because the truth is that the tragedy of the Congo is not merely a Congolese or an African problem. It is our problem. And the reason is in our phones and in our jewelry. Mr. Speaker, many people are simply shocked to learn the scale of the crimes in the Congo and the connection between consumers and the conflict. So for the record, here are some of the facts.
The conflict that has been raging since 1998 in the Democratic Republic of Congo is the most deadly since World War II. In 2011, the rate of rapes was estimated to 48, not per year, per month, or even per day, but 48 rapes every hour. Rape is used as a weapon of war.
Il y avait 2,1 millions de personnes déplacées, environ la population combinée du Manitoba et de la Saskatchewan. Conflict minerals generate $180 million per year for armed groups, literally keeping some militias in business. Many, up to 40% of those working in the mines, are children. These children, exploited and abused, are then prime targets for recruitment by armed groups. The lack of public awareness about this issue might seem like a cause for despair, but for me, it is a cause for hope. Because when people do learn about the connection between minerals and conflict, they are connected directly themselves. And once they are personally connected to this issue, they cannot help but care. Since my time in the Congo, I have made it a personal priority to use my role as a legislator to help connect Canadians to this issue and curtail the presence of conflict minerals in Canada.
Last March, I tabled the Conflict Minerals Act in the House of Commons.
The drafting process was comprehensive, with many months of positive and fruitful consultations with industry and civil society representatives in Canada and abroad. The bill was introduced at a time of international action on conflict minerals, and the pace has only picked up since last year. In May
2011, the OECD, that is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, published a guide and formulated a recommendation on due diligence to be exercised in this regard. Then, in August 2012, the U.S. Securities Commission announced the adoption of a new regulation requiring that corporations show due diligence when it comes to the use of tin, titanium, tungsten, or gold.
Its own regulations following consultations with a wide range of stakeholders. At last year's G8 summit in Scotland, Canada joined other countries in making important commitments to extractive sector transparency. In the G8 communique, the government specifically pledged to support conflict-free mineral sourcing. I want to read a section of that pledge tonight from Section 40 of the communique. Quote, as part of our commitment to extractive transparency, we continue to support responsible conflict-free sourcing of minerals from conflict-affected regions, including gold, diamonds, and other precious stones. We will promote positive economic development and responsible sourcing in the artisanal mining sector, particularly from conflict and high-risk areas. We reaffirm our continued support for the OECD due diligence guideline for responsible supply chains of minerals from conflict-affected and high-risk areas and International Conference of the Great Lakes Regional Certification Mechanism as part of a global, multilateral, multi-stakeholder efforts to combat the trade in conflict minerals through certification, responsible business and conduct, and respect for human rights. That was a quote from the communique. This bill implements the OECD guidelines mentioned in this communique. It's simply a matter of keeping our promise, Mr. Speaker. Pratiquement, toutes les grandes faits.
From a practical standpoint, all the large technology companies, from BlackBerry to Microsoft, Apple, and Nokia, are now making an effort to avoid using conflict minerals in their products.
We've seen path-breaking, game-changing commitments to source conflict-free minerals. In January, Intel announced that its microprocessors would be conflict-free. And in February, Apple committed to sourcing the minerals in its products responsibly. Apple has already followed through on this commitment for tantalum, and they are doing so for tin, tungsten, and gold. These industry leaders are showing that a better supply chain is possible, and so is a better world. These companies also realize that in today's market, accountable companies have a competitive advantage. This was the message I received in consultations with Canadian industry representatives. Companies are ready to get on board with regulations so long as the regulations are clear and emphasize the competitive advantage of social responsibility. The private sector will accept clear rules for transparency and accountability. Government needs to be responsible as well. My bill would implement the OECD guidelines in Canada.
The bill requires that Canadian corporations that use minerals that come from the Great Lakes region of Africa, that they exercise due diligence so that no armed group involved in illegal activities benefits from processing or extraction or use of such minerals.
To publish their findings on their website and in documents filed with the Canadian government. The government would then share the report with the producing countries. This would support local efforts to manage and reform the mining industry, supporting action from the ground up. The bill recognizes that stopping the conflict mineral trade requires collaboration between governments in both developed and developing countries, as well as with civil society and industry. Working together is the only way that lasting results can be achieved. Collaboration requires leadership, Mr. Speaker. I would like to see that initiative coming from Canada. It's a role that Canada can and should play. Canadian mining companies are market leaders. It's time Canada became a corporate social responsibility leader as well. Canada and Canadian companies should be diligent, accountable, and transparent in their operations overseas. But this is as much about consumer rights as corporate responsibility.
My bill will enable Canadians to find out whether the minerals in the technological products that they buy could have been funded by or fed such conflicts. Thus, as consumers, they will be in a position to make enlightened choices.
I believe that consumers, if given the necessary information, will hold companies accountable for their sourcing choices. To complement this legislative effort, I also launched the Just Minerals campaign. It's a grassroots initiative to support action on conflict minerals. We've partnered with a wide variety of groups, from students to environmental campaigns to Congolese associations to fair trade advocates. Across the country, on and offline, the campaign is underway and gathering steam. More than 3,000 Canadians have already signed our petition supporting the bill. And ce n'est pas une question de...
This is not a question of left or right-wing policy. This is a question of right and wrong. Together, we have the power to make our world a better place. It's up to us to take action.
The Dodd-Frank Act that brought in similar requirements got bipartisan support. I also believe that change is possible because we've done this before. The Blood Diamonds campaign is a fantastic example of how the world and Canada can make real improvements in the sourcing of consumer goods. The illegal trade in diamonds was providing substantial funding to warlords and rebels in Africa throughout the 1990s. Separate and joint meetings of diamond-producing countries, international organizations, global civil society, and extractive companies led to the Kimberley process for certifying rough diamond exports. Today, Kimberley process members account for nearly all of the global production of rough diamonds. Illegal exports are largely prevented, and legal trade is fostered by the increased consumer confidence provided by certification.
This legal and responsible trade contributes to sustainable development, both economic and social. We now have an opportunity to change the mineral trade in the same way with regard to the conflict in Central Africa.
Minerals have been attracting ever greater levels of attention from extractive corporations, local governments, and international NGOs. De plus en plus,
Increasingly, businesses are becoming interested in social and environmental responsibility.
In Central Africa is growing. Although my bill would be the first to implement the OECD due diligence guidelines in an OECD country, they've already been enshrined in law in the DRC and Rwanda. Some exciting projects are now underway to bag and tag mineral exports in the same way that diamonds are now traced. Partnership Africa Canada, for example, a civil society leader in implementing the Kimberley process, is doing just that right now. Internationally, last year's G8 communique reiterated support for responsible, conflict-free mineral sourcing and cited the OECD guidelines. The time is right for significant change. On trouve des minéraux.
Minerals are found all over the world, but they do not need to be tainted by blood. Together, we must prevent the Congolese conflict to land on our territory.
I sincerely hope that we can work together on this bill, demonstrating that the cooperation that Canadians want and the world needs. Mr. Speaker, together, let's take conflict out of Canadian homes. Thank you very much.
Well said.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's good to be able to rise and be part of the debate today. To be able to speak on the issue of conflict minerals and the role that Canada is playing on the international stage to address this problem. And first of all, I want to thank the Honourable Member of Parliament for Ottawa Centre for drawing attention to this important issue. As outlined in the preamble to his bill, the Government of Canada has been active for many years in advancing initiatives designed to address that nexus between natural resources and conflict. And as one of his colleagues asked a few minutes ago about the role that Canada has played, one of the places that we have played an important role is on the OECD due diligence guidance document that's been put in place that is now gaining international acceptance. And I'm pleased to say that this government agrees wholeheartedly with the honourable member that further engagement by Canada is warranted in order to find effective and efficient ways to address the issue of conflict minerals. However, Mr. Speaker, I have to say that we do not agree that Bill C-486 will bring us closer to this goal. He talks about establishing clear roles for transparency and accountability in his speech. We do not believe that that would be the result of this bill. Before I outline some of our concerns with the present bill, I'd like to talk a bit more about how minerals have been linked to conflict and what is being done about it already. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the Kimberley process on conflict diamonds, which was developed in response to the use of diamonds to fund violence and conflict in such countries as Liberia and Angola in the late 1990s. Canada was a founding member of the Kimberley process, and as a leading diamond producer and exporter, we continue to play an active role in the initiative. While it's not perfect, the Kimberley process has helped to deprive criminals and armed groups of easy access to capital. But the illicit use of minerals to fund violence, which is meant by the term conflict minerals, did not end with the establishment of the Kimberley process. While it's not perfect, it has impacted in its area. A new generation of conflict minerals, however, has emerged since, which includes gold and the so-called 3 Ts, tin, tungsten, and tantalum. These minerals are used in a variety of industry sectors, including aerospace, automotive, and perhaps most notably, the electronics industry. Indeed, these minerals are present in all of those gadgets that we love so much. Unfortunately, in some contexts, the illicit trade in these minerals is contributing to violence and conflict. The problem is particularly acute in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC. The lack of state control in that part of the country benefits various armed groups that illegally control mining sites by taxing miners and trafficking in illegally sourced minerals. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the international community is taking action. Canada is playing a leading role. The OECD, in cooperation with international partners, has developed a due diligence framework that I mentioned in order to foster responsible mineral supply chains. The purpose of that framework, which is known as the OECD Due Diligence Guidance, is to help companies that are operating in conflict-affected and high-risk areas identify and mitigate against risks related to their sourcing decisions and practices, and to avoid contributing to human rights abuses and conflicts. The Canadian government actively participated in the negotiation of the guidance, which includes mineral-specific supplements on gold and the 3 Ts. We continue to be engaged in its promotion and implementation, and we currently chair the multi-stakeholder steering group, which serves as the management committee for this forum. What's more, several Canadian companies have been in the forefront of efforts to combat conflict minerals and have incorporated the guidance into their management systems. Others are implementing industry-led initiatives pertaining to conflict minerals that are consistent with and build on these guidelines. For example, the members of the World Gold Council, which includes several Canadian companies, adhere to the conflict-free gold standard. This standard establishes a common approach by which gold producers can assess and provide assurance that their gold has been extracted in a responsible manner. Several Canadian gold refiners have also been certified under the conflict-free smelter program, which was set up by the electronics industry. I should note here that smelters and refiners have been identified as the critical juncture between the mineral supply chain, as traceability becomes extremely difficult after that point. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to emphasize that all these activities and initiatives are international in scope because the mineral supply chain is global in nature. In other words, Mr. Speaker, conflict minerals are an international problem requiring international solutions to bring all of the relevant actors, the government, companies, and civil society to the table. Unfortunately, we do not believe that Bill C-486 aligns with this approach. The genesis of the bill is clear, and its intent it mirrors Section 1502 of the U.S. Dodd-Frank Act by requiring companies to undertake due diligence activities and to report annually on these activities. But in contrast to the U.S. legislation, which is focused, as I mentioned earlier, on manufacturing companies, Bill C-486 is broad. It is not focused. It implicates every stage of the complex mineral supply chain. Moreover, in contrast with the OECD guidance, which recommends targeted audits of due diligence practices at those key points that I've mentioned, Bill C-486 would require each and every report produced to be audited by an independent third party. And so, Mr. Speaker, you can see the incredible bureaucracy that would build around this. So what is the anticipated result of implementation of this bill? We would certainly make a whole lot of companies pay for a whole lot of reports. We'd also have some very happy auditors. But do we think that anything on the ground would change as a result? Indeed, would 486 actually stop conflict minerals from entering international markets or put an end to protracted and complex conflict in the DRC, which happens to be the primary focus of the members' campaign against conflict minerals? We do not believe so. The bureaucratic weight and the complexity that's required by this bill would make it impossible to realize his goals. What about the unintended consequences of focusing exclusively on the Great Lakes region of Africa? This has been a huge problem, a huge concern with U.S. legislation. That is, the fact that numerous countries have simply chosen to source these minerals from elsewhere, not because there's necessarily conflict where they had their operations, but because the countries didn't have the capacity to set up the structures that were required to do the reporting. Developing or depriving developing economies of much-needed investment and local communities of much-needed empowerment will not solve the conflict minerals problem, and indeed, Mr. Speaker, it may actually exacerbate it. Mr. Speaker, there's no doubt that the ongoing conflict in the DRC has had a devastating impact on the lives of civilians, especially women and children. The prevalence of serious human rights violations in the eastern region of the DRC in particular, including continued acts of sexual violence and alleged crimes against humanity, are of huge concern to our government. Now, our efforts in development, peace efforts, or peace support operations rather in the DRC, have included funding projects on enhancing the effectiveness of security institutions, strengthening the capacity of Congolese authorities to curtail the illicit exploitation of natural resources, and mediating and preventing conflict. In October of 2012, our Prime Minister announced a Canadian commitment of $18.5 million over 5 years to provide legal, medical, and emotional support to victims of sexual violence in the DRC and to assist law enforcement agencies in bringing perpetrators of these crimes to justice. We've also called for concerted efforts to implement concrete solutions to the conflict and advocated for the engagement of regional actors in particular to protect civilians, including women and children, and to pave the way for peace and stability in that region. With all due respect to the concerns of the honourable member for Ottawa Centre, a complex situation like the one in the DRC cannot be solved with more tape or more red tape for these countries. And, Mr. Speaker, I should just point out that the fact that Dodd-Frank touches on specifically the manufacturing, while this bill is much broader and would force companies to report at every sector, so the extraction sector, the transportation sector, refining sector, the processing sector, the manufacturing sector, retailing sector, and even recycling those products would all require reports to be filed and then to be audited by third parties. And we just believe that that is an onerous burden that does not achieve the result that the member opposite would like to see. Making progress in the fight against conflict minerals need not come at expenses of responsible investment in affected areas. For example, as I mentioned earlier, smelters and refiners have been identified as a critical juncture in the mineral supply chain. More work can be done to encourage these actors to participate in certification initiatives. And as the member mentioned earlier, this seems to be working. This voluntary approach seems to be working. Companies such as Apple and Intel were mentioned by him as companies that have taken this seriously and are applying it. So there's no doubt that further international efforts are required to tackle the problem of conflict of minerals, Mr. Speaker, but pursuing a mandatory initiative such as the member has presented is not an approach that this government can endorse. Thank you.
It's with pleasure that I rise today to address what I think is a very important piece of legislation. I appreciate the fact that the member has been very diligent in terms of working over the years that have ultimately seen it surface here this evening. The idea of further engagement by Canada in this whole area is something that would be wonderful to see. More initiatives. At the end of the day, we would like to ultimately see this bill pass into committee stage. Amended, we believe that this bill could play a very important role in terms of providing leadership at the international level, and we would recommend that that be allowed. Be allowed in the sense of, at the very least, pass a second reading so that members of the public and some of the different stakeholders can come to Ottawa or contribute to a wider debate with the idea of making amendments. And I think that is something that is quite easily achievable. The Liberal Party itself does believe that companies must have a socially as well as a financial responsibility to our communities, and to that end, this particular piece of legislation could further that social responsibility. And as such, with certain amendments brought forward, we would be very supportive of this bill going to committee. Mr. Speaker, I did have an opportunity to try to get a bit better of an understanding of the issue at hand. And the first time I was really invited out to a classroom after being elected in the last federal election, this was the issue. that they had chosen to talk about. They were aware of the member from Ottawa's bill, and they also were aware of the member from Scarborough-Guildwood's bill, which is the Sunshine Bill. And they wanted to ask if, in fact, what I had thought about it. And at the time, I really didn't know too much about the bill, so I did more listening than I did talking in regards to this particular piece of legislation. And what I thought was interesting is that after the discussion, they had indicated that they were doing some petitions and had asked if, in fact, I would be prepared to present petitions on their behalf. Of course, Mr. Speaker, I was more than happy to do so, and I have tabled petitions on both pieces of legislation that are actually before the House today. And I raise that because I don't believe, Mr. Speaker, that it's just members of the House that understand and appreciate the importance of this issue. That you have individuals of all generations that recognize that what is taking place is in fact wrong, and that there is a great deal of merit for us to be moving forward. And that's why I was a little bit discouraged coming from the government, what seems to be an unwillingness to ultimately see the bill at the very least go into committee, because my understanding is that the Democratic Party is in fact open to amendments. And based on that, Mr. Speaker, I would think it would be a mistake for us not to allow it to get to committee. I understand, that it's really all about money, greed, corruption, there's violence, murder, human rights tragedies that have occurred. It's all occurred because of the exploitation of minerals. And it has had a very profound impact on a number of countries that circle the African Great Lakes. I had looked up some of those countries that we're referring to, Mr. Speaker, are Burundi, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is really the heart of the matter of this particular bill, Mr. Speaker, and I understand it's the eastern portion of it. Kenya, Rwanda, which is a country that has had a great deal in regards to this sorts of exploitation. Tanzania, Uganda. And these are just the countries that circle the African Great Lakes. And, Mr. Speaker, I can recall watching a bit of a documentary. When you think of these Great Lakes, it is a massive area. And when you talk about the beauty of some of these lakes, the Lake Victoria, which I believe is in the top 3 or 4 in terms of just size and magnitude and beauty for a lake. The potential is so great for that region of the world, Mr. Speaker, and yet we have a number that have actually, a number of organizations or not necessarily governments. I want to be careful in terms of the way in which I put this. We can say rebels, warring factions, that over the years, private security forces, that over the years have really taken advantage of the minerals that are there. Call them conflict minerals, Mr. Speaker. These minerals ultimately end up in as consumer products. And they've taken those minerals and the monies that can be made by those minerals, and sadly, not only have they enriched very few, but it has ultimately, I would suggest to you, Mr. Speaker, is propelled the continual violence in many of those regions, and are added to and compounded the problems in many different ways. And that's why I do believe that Canada does have a role to play in this. We can send a strong message. And that message, through this particular piece of legislation, at the core of that is corporate responsibility, in recognizing that there is, by our standards, there is some things that are just not acceptable. that we do need to ensure that there's corporate responsibility, that it's not good to make money off of human tragedy to the degree in which we have seen it around the African Great Lakes, in particular in that Congo area. And to obligate that corporate responsibility through legislation is, in fact, a step in the right direction. I've indicated that there are some concerns that we do have. So, for example, Mr. Speaker, the definition of company is over broad and will affect everything from, for example, major mining companies in Zambia to the local jewelry store that here in Canada. This is due to the bill's general nature. Instead of targeting companies on the ground, it virtually takes a grab at all companies. Mr. Speaker, the lack of consequences or punishment or failure to implement due diligence or submit an annual report does raise some concerns. At the end of the day, I think that we can bring forward some amendments that would change the bill to target primary source companies, for example. Those are the companies that first handle the minerals. I think an amendment of that nature would be of great benefit. Make references to the OECD due diligence guidance for responsible supply chains of minerals from conflict-affected and high-risk areas more explicit and consistent throughout the bill. The idea that we specify terms of the audit for an annual report. There is some merit in terms of looking at other developing countries. Maybe look at expanding the list of countries to include developing countries as defined, for example, by the UN. And, Mr. Speaker, I look at it and want to indicate that there is something that we can do. And we should be doing it because I believe, as no doubt the member from Ottawa or my colleague, or I would suggest to you that all members would like to see Canada play a more significant role. When I go back to the classroom discussion that we had, Mr. Speaker, they talked a lot about those consumer products. And the ones that came to my mind were the ones that, in particular, they were using. It's the laptops, it's the cell phones, it's the MP3 players, so much in terms of electronics. Mr. Speaker, I would suggest to you that we should listen to what our youth are saying, listen to what is the right thing to be doing. We see this bill as a positive step forward and would suggest to you that we should at the very least allow it to go to committee where it can enhance and demonstrate that Canada can play a stronger leadership role on this particular issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.